So I did something that I very rarely do, during the week at least. I watched a full-length movie. I was sitting there watching, fucking around with the news and shit. And in my suggested YouTube movies is playing a documentary called Hillary's America. And like the picture looked all fucking psychedelic purple and shit, and I'm like, alright. I knew it was an anti-Hillary documentary, but I'm like, alright, let's fucking listen to this, trash. Just see how long I can fucking make it through it. So I start watching it, just interested to see what they were going to talk about. And opening credits are rolling, and it said it was a D'Souza production, and I'm like, I like Dinesh D'Souza. This might actually be good. And it was very good. I thought it was very, very good. Dinesh D'Souza begins by talking about his conviction for campaign finance fraud or whatever. He talks about the time that he spent in jail. And then he kind of goes through like the history of the Democratic Party. From its inception, the people that were key figures in its, in its creation and its history. Yeah. It was very interesting. And then he goes into, Hillary Clinton. And like, it was interesting to watch because I'm so steeped in this shit now. So watching a documentary about American history and current events and recent, past events and shit like that, I'm so steeped in everything that's happened. It's interesting for me watching those kind of documentaries because I'm sitting there and like, it's mostly recreations. Obviously, there wasn't a lot of film at the Continental Congress and shit like that. So it was mostly recreations. And I'm sitting there, I'm sitting there listening to these recreations, these quotes, and I'm like, that can't seriously be a fucking quote. I'm like, Andrew Jackson did not say that shit. And, it's a documentary. Like, I'm not stupid, and neither is Dinesh D'Souza. I'm sure if I looked up that shit, I'd find out it was true. And, I'm watching, and then there's other points where I'm like, I remember hearing that guy said that. You know what I mean? And then, like, they go through the whole thing, and there's so many parts where I'm like, really? And then they get into, like, Margaret Sanger, and I'm like, I know way too fucking much about Margaret fucking Sanger. And, like, they're doing all these Margaret Sanger recreations, and I'm like, yep, that shit happened. Like, they kind of... Dinesh D'Souza is very good at making documentaries. If you haven't watched one of his documentaries before, they're excellent. When I saw it was a D'Souza production, I was like, oh, this is actually good. So, it was very good. It's done very well. It had all the drama that Dinesh D'Souza likes to put in his documentaries. So they kind of, he sets up Margaret Sanger, and then it kind of fucking zooms in on her as she's giving an address in front of the fucking Klan. And I'm like, I remember reading about that. Yup, that shit happened. And like, they had the recreation of her speech, and I'm like, yup, I remember that in the speech. Because I did my own little documentary about Planned Parenthood. I believe I referenced it before. I said it was on the Stealth channel. I might have to reload up. Let me know if you want me to re-upload the Planned Parenthood documentary to this channel so that kind of the bigger audience can see it. If you don't care, then whatever. But nevertheless, what was I saying? Oh, yeah, and I had to learn a lot about Margaret Sanger. That's why I know way too much about Margaret Sanger. I don't like Margaret Sanger. It's actually kind of funny because there's a magic card, a black card. It's a fucking vampire called a Sanger vampire. Whenever I say Margaret Sanger, it reminds me of that fucking picture from that card, that vampire with blood coming out of his mouth. It just fucking pops into my head every time. Ugh, woman. She was a terrible, terrible person. And like they're interlacing that whole segment with like calls, I imagine setup calls, or at least on one side, right? Of people calling up Planned Parenthood and they're like, I want to make a donation. And they're like, great. And they're like, but I want to make it, you know, I want this donation to go towards a specific area. And they're like, okay. And he's like, I want it to go towards, you know, like inner city black people. I want them to get the benefit of this donation. And they're like, great. And I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, nobody should know that you can do that. Like that's one of those things where I'm like, oh my God, it's so irresponsible to let people know that they're that fucking racist. Because people are going to see that and be like, oh my God, I can fund just killing off whatever type of person I don't like. Like, dude, for anybody to know that, for black people to be like, I want my donations to go to white people, that's bad. I'm like, we can't seriously have a fucking organization that is letting people fund whatever genocide they want to. I'm like, oh! And I'm sitting there going, that cannot be fucking real. Because that I didn't know. And I'm like, I don't even want to look that up. I can't even fucking have that be in my rule. I'm like, I can't do it. And then they're showing Project Veritas videos of the people talking about, well, what kind of compensation would you want for good baby parts? And the lady goes, I want a Lamborghini. And I'm like, oh, I know that's real. Because I fucking had to talk about that shit. And I'm like, oh, please don't tell me those calls are real. And like, one of them was so absurd. So fucking absurd. That it's like, you know, my son, you know, I just had a child. So I want to donate to my specific area just to black people because I don't want him to have to compete for college someday. And the lady goes, understandable. And I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, no, dude, no. I'm like, that is monumentally just horrific. I'm like, that, no. So, I mean, there was a lot of moments like that in it, and like, it was a very well done documentary, but man, like, you know the thing I like to say, if half of that shit is true, all of it is fucking terrible. I know that half of that shit is true because I'm so fucking steeped in it. All of the shit, like when it got to Hillary Clinton, I'm like, well, okay, well, this is the part I fucking know everything about. And he just talked about, you know, Uranium One, and I'm like, yeah, I know about that. And he talked about the Haiti thing, and I'm like, man, I know about that. You know what I mean? He talked about Saul Alinsky, and dude, I think it was a very well done documentary. And if half of it is true, all of it is terrible. And I know for a fact that half of it is true. So, but he makes a really good argument too. Beyond the history lesson, his argument is extremely sound. In that, as I'm watching it, because this movie was made in order to fight the election of Hillary Clinton. This was all before Donald Trump. It's also very interesting to watch a political documentary where they only mention Trump's name like twice, because it used clips from the election when she was running for office, and like she mentioned Trump's name like twice. Trump wasn't in it at all. So it was really interesting to watch a documentary that didn't have him in it at all, except for mentioned by name twice. Like that was really weird. You know, so, but yeah, it was to fight Hillary, and like I'm watching it going, like it's still going on today. when they're going into the thing talking about the rise of the Klan and this, that, and the other thing, and fucking Woodrow Wilson or whoever the fuck it was, and all this fucking shit, and I'm sitting there going, oh my god, it's Antifa and BLM. And like, there was one part where they're talking about when and this I know is true, when the Klan marched through New York because the Democrats refused to denounce them. And I'm sitting here going, Joe Biden, 2 days ago, said Antifa is an idea. It's not an organization. You know what I mean? Like, I'm sitting here watching this documentary that was made predicting what the country would look like if Hillary Clinton became president. And I'm sitting here going, and now they're just pushing it to the max. Like, they couldn't win and just make it happen. So they just are forcing it now. Like, all of it. They're just resorting to the most base tactics that you can use. And it's interesting because it's literally history repeating itself. So it was a very interesting watch. It was a very interesting and very depressing watch. Because I'm watching it going, oh my god, they're still just doing it. And it's... So, right now, in YouTube movies, Hillary's America is free with commercials. Like, then they're like the commercials you see in front of my videos or whoever else's. They're the ones you can skip and the ones you can, whatever, you know, the basic commercials. I think I had 4? I think I had 4. Might have been 5. I want to say I had 4. In an hour and a half? Commercials I could skip through? Or 2 5-second commercials I couldn't? It's better than a minute and a half or 2 minutes or whatever, you know, kind of commercials you get watching TV. I'll take it for a free movie. But yeah, so it's available right now on YouTube if you would like to watch it. I recommend it for the history lesson, which is very nice. But man, when it gets to Hillary Clinton, dude, just watch it for the enjoyment and just don't think about how it just is still going, because it's sad.